Hi, I'm Robert Reed. Welcome to Everything Capture One. Or maybe, I'm still working on the title. Anyway, today's episode is about recipes. Recipe sounds kind of boring. Alright, today's episode is about how to deliver hundreds of images in multiple formats and many directories with a single click. Does that sound cool? So let's say you've got a client that has very particular demands on how they want their images delivered. Maybe they sent you a document that looks like this. They want a folder per image and then the image in multiple formats in each folder. This is something that is actually, it may look daunting initially, but it's actually very easy to set this kind of thing up in Capture One using the process recipes. In Capture One, in the default workspace, click on the gear icon. And this is where all the process recipes are. These are the default recipes that come in Capture 120, and you can get to any of these in the future if you delete these by long clicking on the plus, and it's the same recipes here. You can just recreate them. So I'm going to be deleting these, and I'm going to keep the JPEG full size because that is one of the options that I want to deliver for this particular client, and I'm going to create the rest. Now, one thing to be aware of is these recipes are not specific to a session or a catalog, so you don't necessarily want to customize this for every client. This list of recipes will be in all of the sessions, so it's a global setting. So I'd recommend creating the set of recipes that you want to use to keep your workflow organized and the way you want to deliver images. And if you have a custom job, then create a new set just for that job and delete them when you're done. So let's create a recipe from scratch. Just click the plus, and this first one is going to be for Instagram. Now down here in the process recipe is where we can change all the settings we want for this recipe. So the first thing to change, of course, is the format. We want this one to be a JPEG. The quality, 100 is the best quality, but we probably only need 80 for social media, maybe even less. If your files are particularly large, you may need to reduce that even more. For the color profile, sRGB is usually the best choice for online viewing. We don't need to worry about resolution because we're going to be setting the scale to a fixed number of pixels. Now for Instagram, the specification there is the width of the file needs to be no larger than 1080. So we're going to set the width and change the pixels. So this means that whether the file is horizontal or vertical, the width is always going to be 1080. So if it's tall, it will actually be larger than that, but it's the width that Instagram cares about the most. So that's what we have to set it to. The other parts of the recipe tool, there's the crop option to just respect the crop or ignore it. For this type of rule for exporting a deliverable image, we definitely want the respect the crop, and you probably also want to enable the sharpening. Just nice to have a little bit of extra sharpening done when it's being exported. For metadata, you can control which metadata is included in the image when they're exported. Generally want to include the copyright. It's a good idea, but the rest of these I usually disable. For keywords, you can decide to turn them off completely or select certain keywords from a library. I don't usually use keywords much, so I just leave that alone. And then the watermark, if you want to add a watermark, you can do a text or an image-based watermark here and add that to all the images. So the last section here is the file section. And this we definitely need to customize because we need to make sure every recipe is customizing the file name as well as the settings of the file, because we want to be able to differentiate which file goes where when they're exported. So to do that, we can just set the subname, and we'll use that when we create the output naming scheme later on. We can also customize the folder that images for this recipe are saved in, but we don't need to do that in this case because we actually want all of these stored in the same folder. We'll set the custom folder later on. That's it for Instagram. Let's create another recipe. So let's duplicate this one. We need to customize the name. So the main difference between the social media platforms is the file size and how they specify the file size. So unlike Instagram, which only cares about width, Facebook wants the max size in either direction, width or height, to be set to 2048. So to do that, we just set the long edge and set that to 2048. So whether it's a horizontal or a vertical image, that largest side is always going to be scaled down to 2048. So let's do one more. In this case, I'm going to do Pinterest, which is similar to Facebook, but their max is 1500. And of course, we need to change this as well. So there we have 4 recipes set up now. We still need to worry about creating the right folder structure and making sure the names are customized. We want the project name to be the top level folder and then one folder for each image. and then make sure that these names get set up correctly. To do the folders, and we can look at the output location. The default destination is always going, in a session anyway, is always going to be the output folder of the session. In my templates, I always set that name to be process files. And now we can set the subfolder, which we can use the tags. So the project name I always use as the session name, so we can get to use that as the document name tag, and then create a slash to create another folder. And here we're going to use the image name and just hit return. So we want those two tags, it's going to dynamically populate the name of this folder based on the session name and also the name of the image. And we need to use the tags as well in the output naming. By default, it uses image name, which is fine, but I'm going to add to that the subname so that for the recipes that have a subname, it gets appended to the image name. So now it's time to process images. Let's select a few images. Just do these 4 images and process. There we can see the images are populating those folders. There we go. One click, we just produced 16 files. So let's talk about cropping for a second. Now, when you crop, you do see these measurements on the sides of the crop, and those numbers are related directly to the recipe that's currently chosen. So we're in Pinterest, the max size is 1500, and that's where this comes from. If I change it to Facebook, see this jumps to 2048, Instagram, and the full size, it's 20 inches wide. So these numbers simply indicate the dimensions of the file or the image would be if you saved it using the currently selected process recipe. It does not mean that when you save this crop, it's going to shrink the file down to just be 1500 pixels. It has nothing to do with that. It's not changing the file internally. It just means when it's saved or processed with the current recipe, that's what it's going to be. So let's create one more recipe that is actually going to show us how crop and recipes work together in a different way. So let's change this to Twitter. Now for a Twitter, the ideal image size for Twitter is actually 1200 by 628. So what we're going to do is select dimensions and set this to pixel and 628. But now the aspect ratio in our crop doesn't match what we just created in the recipe. And you'll see this number here is red, which means this doesn't match. Now we don't need to create a custom aspect ratio for this crop because there's actually a feature there that allows us to use the aspect ratio in the recipe. We just use the output in the crop listing. And that will take the dimensions, and you have to use dimensions as the scale in order for this to work. And we just change the crop and it snaps directly to the right to the aspect ratio that we want. And there we go. And one other thing we need to do, of course, is update the file name. Now we want to unselect all these because we've already processed this file before. We just want to process the Twitter, and it's Twitter. For this image, we see Twitter here in the folder, and it put it in the right spot for this image. And that's how you can use recipes to automate creating all of the directories and files that you need to deliver a project. I'm Robert Reed. Thanks for watching. If this was interesting, it would be great if you subscribed. Then you get notified when I create my next video, which is hopefully going to be even more interesting. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.